Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is one of the most important concepts in evolutionary biology. And to understand it, you have to understand a little bit about how Darwin came up with this theory. Now, Charles Darwin lived from 1809 to 1882, and in 1831, when he was only 22 years old, Darwin set sail on a 5-year voyage around the world on the HMS Beagle, and his job on the Beagle was the ship's naturalist, which meant he had to collect specimens of plants and animals and document them on the round-the-world trip at each location they went to. And one of the things he collected in the Galapagos Islands, off the coast of South America, was different species of finches. So Charles Darwin returned from his voyage to England in 1836, and in 1837 he consulted an ornithologist or a bird expert by the name of John Gould about the finches that he had collected in the Galapagos Islands. And Gould could tell from the bill structures that some of the birds ate small seeds, whereas others ate large seeds, fruits, or insects. And in all, he described 14 different distinct types of finches, each different from the birds that were on the mainland, yet sharing some of these features. So Darwin thought that the different varieties of finches on the Galapagos had probably descended from a single ancestral type of finch that had flown to the islands and, finding a relatively unoccupied new habitat, had flourished. Then over the next 3 million years, the finch populations gradually branched into several directions. Different groups ate insects, fruits, and seeds of different sizes depending on the resources each island offered. Darwin also noted changes in other species, including Galapagos tortoises, and he coined the phrase descent with modification to describe gradual changes from ancestral type. Descent with modification also implies another very important evolutionary concept, which is referred to as common descent. So in this example, you had a mainland finch, which flew over to the Galapagos Islands, resulting in the evolution of different species. Let's just say some that ate seeds, fruit, and insects. So these 3 different species have adapted their beaks to their environment. However, they all had a common ancestor. They're all descended from a common ancestor, which was the mainland finch, with which they share similar characteristics with variations. So this is that whole concept of descent with modification from a common ancestor or from a common descent. So although Darwin understood descent with modification, he didn't really understand what was the mechanism, what was causing this descent with modification. And that was until he read a work by Thomas Malthus called The Essay on the Principle of Population, which stated that food availability, disease, and war limit the size of a human population. And so he began to think, well, wouldn't other organisms face similar limitations? And if so, then individuals that could not obtain essential resources like food and water may die. And he started applying this concept to the Galapagos Island finches. If there were finches that had beaks that were better suited to collecting insects on a particular island that was full of seeds as the main food source, then they're not going to be as well adapted to living on that island. Therefore, their likelihood of surviving would be less than that of another individual that had a beak adapted to seeds. So over time, environmental challenges would eliminate the more poorly equipped species, and gradually the population would change. And Darwin used the term natural selection to describe the preservation of favourable variations and the rejection of injurious variations. Biologists later modified the definition to add modern genetics terminology, and we now know that natural selection occurs when environmental factors cause the differential reproductive success of individuals with certain genotypes. But Darwin didn't know anything about genetics, so he couldn't actually have come to that conclusion. So where did he actually get his ideas from? Well, he actually got it from looking at artificial selection. In artificial selection, a human chooses one or a few desired traits such as milk production or seed size, and then allows only the individuals that best express those qualities to reproduce. Artificial selection is responsible not only for agriculturally important varieties of animals and plants, but also for the many breeds of domesticated cats and dogs. So, for example, artificial selection is responsible for the production of 5 different vegetables purely from wild mustard. So wild mustard is the common ancestor for all 5 of those vegetables, and through descent with modification caused by artificial selection, you end up with 5 different species of vegetables. So how does this occur in a natural setting? How does this occur with your Galapagos Island finches? Well, originally, some finches flew from the mainland to one island, and eventually that island population outgrew the supply of small seeds, and birds that could eat nothing else starved. But finches that could eat other things, perhaps because of an inherited difference in bill structure, survived and reproduced. Since their food was plentiful, these once unusual birds gradually came to make up more of the population. Darwin further realised that he could extend this idea to multiple islands, each of which had a slightly different habitat, and therefore selected for different varieties of finches. A new species might arise when a population adapted to so many new conditions that its members could no longer breed with the original group. So in a similar way, new species have evolved throughout the history of life as populations have adapted to different resources. But all species are therefore ultimately united by common ancestry. So the basis of evolution is that over time, organisms acquire enough variation that they become a new species, and that's shown quite nicely in this evolutionary tree of Darwin's finches, where you start with a common finch ancestor from the South American mainland that has then branched off into 14 different species of finches which have acquired enough genetic variation from the original ancestor to become a new species. Darwin outlined 4 principles of natural selection which have been modified due to our understanding of genetics and inheritance. And these modern principles of natural selection, as that individuals within a population show variation within their phenotypes, and that is evident from the different beak shapes of Darwin's finches. Much of this variation, as we know today, is due to different alleles and therefore is inheritable, so it can be passed from one generation to the next. There is competition for resources and territories, which means there is a struggle for existence. So there's going to be more offspring that are born than can survive and reproduce. And finally, some individuals that have traits that make them more suited to their environments than others. And these individuals are better able to survive and reproduce. And this is sometimes referred to as fitness, evolutionary fitness. These individuals are also better able to pass their alleles on to their offspring, and the traits that enable these individuals to better survive and reproduce are selected for.